Welcome to the e-commerce growth show, brought to you by Segmentify.
Carlos again for another e-commerce growth show brought by Segmentify. Today we have Jason Goldberg. So Scott will be introducing Jason. Jason, thanks very much once again. It's really nice to have you here. Scott, please.
All right. Thank you, Carlos. And hello, everyone. Scott Emmons here for another episode of the e-commerce growth show USA. And we are excited to have Jason Goldberg, otherwise known as the Retailgeek, as our guest today. If I look at Jason's resume, which currently is Chief Commerce Strategy Officer at Publicis Communications, he claims to be a fourth-generation retailer. He launched his first e-commerce site with Blockbuster Video in 1995. I was teaching Unix system administration at that time, was my role, something very different than what I do.
Nice.
Today.
We could talk Emacs versus VI later, maybe.
Exactly. I was a VI wizard, man. And you know what? Once you have that, it never goes away, it turns out.
I'll bet your fingers still know the shortcuts. So yeah.
As a Mac user, that stuff comes in pretty handy when you need to get down under the hood of the thing, to be honest. So it still serves me from time to time. Continuing on, because your bio is another one of those that could be the entire show, just the reading of it.
Let's not do that.
Which we won't, but interesting kind of highlights, right? It sits on the board of directors of shop.org, which it's not really shop.org is not really a thing now, right? It's NRF Next, NXT, I think. So I assume you're still involved there.
Yeah, absolutely. The shop.org got bought by the National Retail Federation maybe 5 years ago. So today the organization that was shop.org is now sort of the digital council component of the National Retail Federation.
Yeah, it'd be interesting maybe later in the show to chat about that sort of transition, because that was a big player during its time, and and has certainly pivoted over the years as the whole retail scene has changed before our eyes. Also, Jason's a prolific producer of content. Including a YouTube channel and a very well attended podcast, the Jason and Scott Show. Though his Scott only has one T, unlike me, who is two T's. I'm the full Scott, as opposed to the one T Scott.
100%. I like to say Scott's parents were good at SEO, but they spelled his name wrong.
Yeah. So the Jason Scott Show, there are a lot of content there and a lot of really interesting stuff on that. I was thinking, I think this is like our 8th episode that me and Carlos have recorded. I was thinking, man, we're doing pretty good. 8 hours of content or so. And then I look at, I come across your stuff and I'm doing research on you, and it's like 300 plus hours of online content. Like, wow, we're not even out of the womb yet. In terms, you also have a lot of interesting stuff on Forbes, which I sort of browsed through. I've seen previously, but also did some, browsing to prepare for our talk today, and a lot of really good stuff there as well. So welcome, and thank you again for joining us today.
Oh my gosh, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
And especially, taking the time out on National Limerick Day. So we appreciate that. And it also turns out it's National Odometer Day, which is weird, I think, that has a day. And probably the most important is it's National Receptionist Day, which, that's actually something that's actionable for some of you out there. And I bet, being a receptionist.
Or it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably been a pretty tough gig over the last year or so as well. So congrats to all the receptionists that might be joining us today. So, we can start out talking about your career a little bit, since you have really done a lot of things. You are, I think recognized, as a top influencer when the conversation is about retail and e-commerce. So tell us a little bit about the journey, of getting from blockbuster e-com to where you sit today.
Yeah. Well, the joke is I keep trying stuff until I find something I'm good at. So hopefully it will happen soon. As you mentioned in your kind introduction, my family's been in retail a long time. In the 90s, which I recognize is before most of our viewers were alive, my uncles had started this interesting business, video rental stores. I know that sounds wacky, but they built up a couple successful stores, and they sold the stores to an entrepreneur that was based here in the United States in Florida, named Wayne Huizinga. And the joke was that I was included in that transaction. So my family sold me into indentured servitude to who I now affectionately think of as Uncle Wayne. Although he's passed away. And some listeners may be familiar, Wayne was the founder or the grower of Blockbuster Video. So those stores were part of the early fleet. Today I work for a big digital agency, and Blockbuster is a huge joke. It's the first slide in every deck that anyone does, and it's like, don't let this happen to you. And I'm always the knucklehead in the back of the room that has to yell, yeah, we sold the company for $15 billion and got out. It wasn't really a bad exit. But back then, e-commerce wasn't a thing. The internet wasn't really even a thing yet. The browser was Mosaic. Mark Andreessen hadn't even written Netscape yet. And we had a meeting at Blockbuster. Should we have a website? Should we try to sell anything on it? And back then, I was the equivalent of the intern that was the only guy in the company that had a computer at home. And so I got assigned to sort of figure that out. That eventually turned into launching a website, eventually turned into launching e-commerce a year before Amazon launched, in fact. And then all ran pretty well when we invented some good campaigns, make it a Blockbuster night, all those sorts of things. And when we sold the business, some more traditional retailers, Best Buy and Target, called and said, hey, we're trying to figure out this e-commerce thing, and it seems like you guys have some early experience at Blockbuster. Can you help us? So ended up getting to work with some really smart teams in Minneapolis, and that kind of bridged the way to me becoming a full-time consultant. And today I do it for a giant advertising holding company.
Amazing. It's funny you mentioned Mosaic. I'd said earlier in the introduction I was doing Unix stuff, back in '95, and in fact, I was doing it for a company called the Santa Cruz operation that had one of the very early internet-enabled platforms. And I was there. CNN actually came and filmed us as we ordered the first pizza from Pizza Hut, off of their brand new commerce site using Mosaic. At the time. So funny, and it's funny to think back how primitive, the internet and the web and all those things were, and what that's evolved to today over time. And you're right, a lot of the folks that are big players in e-commerce today weren't even born, or were running around in diapers anyway. I'm
from 85.
Carlos, was one of those.
85. It's too young, but yeah. All
right, so you were out of your diapers anyway. Yeah. So, Carlos, I know, especially considering what you do with Evolve, that you are especially interested in what Jason's doing with Publicis, and kind of what that role entails, and how does Publicis help retailers and e-commerce providers reach their intended audience, I guess. Yeah. That was to you, Jason. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. You tricked me with the Carlos up front part. It's a little tricky because Publicis is a holding company. So Publicis owns about 400 different agencies, And all of those agencies are independent businesses with separate P&Ls that have their own sort of go-to-market strategies. In the group, there's three big kinds of agencies. There's what we would call media agencies, which traditionally bought newspaper and television space for brands. So those are companies like Spark and Zenith and Starcom that buy all the media for Nike and Starbucks and many others. We have a lot of storied creative agencies that do content and creative work on behalf of clients. So that's like Leo Burnett and Saatchi & a bunch of the companies you would have prominently seen in Mad Men if you were a fan of that show. Sadly, I missed that golden era. Today those guys create the Super Bowl commercials for Walmart. One of our branding agencies invented the Amazon Smile logo, for example. And then there's a third pillar of agencies, which are sort of natively digital agencies that help a lot of brands and retailers with commerce. So that's like Sapient or Digitas or Razorfish. And so I grew up on that digital side, I guess would make the not surprise anyone. Started at Razorfish and sort of matriculated through that channel. And if you're familiar with the Peter principle, you keep getting promoted to your level of incompetence. Today I have sort of a group role. So I help provide commerce insight and expertise to all 400 agencies when they're working with brands or retailers that are trying to solve what I call a commerce problem. So there's a significant content component to my job, as Carlos has identified. Part of it is putting some of our learnings out there and sharing them with the world in the hopes of our brands being well known as practitioners in the space. Frankly, a lot of the brands are kind of lucky. There are a lot of famous incumbent brands that maybe don't have to work super hard for awareness at this point.
Can I then ask a question? Because I spoke to Scott because I thought it was really, really interesting that you guys have this podcast, and I've been creating content myself for the past since I arrived in Denmark. And I think content in itself is like a school, like because you learn how to be more conversational. You learn so much about it, right? And I find it interesting why Publicis they would hire you, with all that conversational, let's say, and breadth of expertise in commerce. And why would they bring that if they are traditionally a PR agency, right, or a conglomerate? It's from France, isn't it? I know a guy in Brazil. And he's suffering because he's a guy doing finance for Publicis. So I kind of like pick his brain on.
I'll be nicer to you. He could probably disapprove my expense reports. I had no idea.
Well, we'll speak about it. I don't know, but I was talking to Scott about this experience that you have as a content creator and as well someone who's been in the trenches of retail, and now Publicis is bringing you in. And what's the deal here? And maybe talk a little bit about the future of agencies, what's going on, and all the acquisitions, M&As, and stuff like that.
Sure. So in fairness, I probably wasn't hired by Publicis. I wasn't really hired as Publicis. I was hired by an agency, and I probably wasn't hired specifically for content creation. It is fair to say I have probably gotten my last 4 jobs because of Twitter.
Right.
So, I mean, that sounds funny, but it's utterly true.
I trust you.
I have enjoyed being an early adopter of a lot of these social networks. I was one of an early user on Twitter, and most of my employers have become aware of me through my contributions there. So it's certainly helped my career quite a bit. But when Razorfish hired me, Razorfish was a storied digital agency. They invented a digital marketing practice you may have heard of called SEO. Launched, they were born in 1994 as a digital agency, which was pretty impressive. owned by Microsoft for a while. Wrote the ad engine that Facebook uses today. Lots of impressive accomplishments there that I had nothing to do with. But when they hired me, they were interested in getting a lot more serious about building e-commerce sites. And I, from the previous experience we discussed, had a lot of experience standing up e-commerce sites, which for a technical company, it's a lot of platform work. Back then it was, should you be on IBM WebSphere Commerce, or should you be on Oracle ATG or SAP Hybris? And what features should we implement? And should we use the personalization features built in IBM Precision Marketing, or should we go to Carlos and buy his personalization solution to layer on top? All of those kind of questions. And so I frankly was hired at Razorfish because I had some credibility and expertise in solving that problem. And in that pillar, we got hired to help Target move off of Amazon, for example, and launch Target.com. We, built the ad network for BestBuy.com. And literally we built hundreds of e-commerce sites for retailers and brands and helped them operate them in many cases. So really, I was hired as an operator, and then because I enjoyed it, I'm horrible at picking hobbies. My hobbies look a lot like my work. I created, some content on the side, and increasingly that content benefited my day job. I certainly, as you alluded to, Carlos, you learn an awful lot about a topic by trying to create content to teach other people about that content. And so it certainly made me smarter and a better communicator. Increasingly it's like, hey, it's when we go to a client pitch and the client, knows me or listens to the podcast or something, that of course, benefits my day gig. So increasingly, it's been easier to lean into the content creation because it has such a tangible benefit to my day gig. And honestly, today it's more public and private content creation than anything else. Like nobody comes to me anymore to help them stand up their e-commerce platform. But we write a lot of point of views and board presentations for clients and things like that.
So you're more like on the thought leadership space. Would it be fair to say that? Yeah.
Yeah. Technically, if you want to get into my actual job description, there's a thought leadership component to be, known externally as a subject matter expert to help our, brands kind of establish their credibility in our space. There's an internal education component. So, Publicis has 140,000 employees. We staff people on commerce projects and it may be their first project and they may need to get upskilled. So I do a lot of content for internal teams to teach them about what's important. And then there is a component to directly engage and help clients. So my biggest client today is Walmart. I spend a lot of time every month helping them navigate all the strategic decisions that they have in front of them, and many other retailers and brands as well.
Yeah, and my next question would be about the, let's say, future of agencies as you see, because for example, I think Joe, you guys probably know him more than I do. He's from the US. Joe Rogan. He was acquired by Spotify for $100 million as a podcaster. Yeah. I think The Hustle recently by HubSpot, and there are so many media companies being acquired, right? Because they understand the audience, they understand how to control attention, which is something you do as well with your show. And so the question then I want to ask you is more on this educational front, and how do you see agencies moving forward? Because still I find it very, very curious that they decided to hire a guy like you because of your social media understanding, but also because of your voice, right? And now your role is pretty much of an educator. And I think education is becoming even more important these days, right? Because people don't have the knowledge that you or Scott, you have. So just to see your views on this, like the future of agencies. Yeah.
Well, the future of to be a successful agency, I think this has always been true, but it certainly feels true at the moment. You really need to be constantly evolving because the clients you serve's needs are constantly evolving, both what they need to do to win their customers, but also what they're good at internally and what they need external help for, right? So in general, clients hire agencies to for scale or to do something that requires a specialty skill that's difficult for that client to hire, right? And in some cases, it's a skill that maybe it's too early or risky for that client to invest in. So you'd rather rent that skill for a while until you know you need it, right? So again, like 8 years ago, lots of clients hired us for our expertise in turning the screws on e-commerce platform software. And it was super complex. It would typically take 18 months to stand up one of these websites, and it would be full of decisions and risk. And you'd require a lot of specialty certifications in that platform, right? And if you're Dick's Sporting Goods, and you're not even sure if e-commerce is going to be meaningful to your business, you may not have wanted 100 WebSphere Commerce software architects, right? Because there were only 500 in the world. So you'd hire an agency that had 100 of them to help you make those decisions about your platform. But two things happen over time. Things that are hard become easy, right? Yeah. And Carlos, if you and I wanted to launch a website tomorrow, like we could hop on a Shopify and we could be live tomorrow, right? And with a pretty rich, full-featured website. And the majority of entrepreneurs are going to do that. They're not going to be hiring an agency to put an army of 500 people on an 18-month e-commerce implementation, right? And so the need for that particular skill probably diminishes. And there's no controversy at Dick's today how important e-commerce is. So of course, whatever platforms they are on, they should want and do have a lot of that capability in-house, right? So if you built an agency exclusively around renting WebSphere expertise to retailers, you would have had a great year where you would have really thrived, and then you would increasingly become irrelevant. And so the trick for these digital agencies or any agencies is to keep anticipating where that puck is going to be. What help is Target going to need next year that it makes more sense to rent than it does for Target to have internally? And once you have that win, where's the puck going to be 2 years from now? So, again, most of the agencies in my world made a lot of money on advertising, and the way advertising looks today is a lot different than the way it looked 5 years ago. And in fact, this year there was more dollars flowing into digital advertising than traditional media, and much more of that is target and dynamically generated. So the skill sets required to do all that are vastly different. And with all the worldwide privacy changes and the depreciation of cookies and IDFA, how digital advertising looks next year is going to be wildly different than how it looks today. And so that both creates an opportunity for agencies, all that churn and dynamicness, but it does mean it's not an industry where you can survive on complacency. If you want to build something and then leverage the heck out of it, agency is not a good model for you, because whatever you built is going to be obsolete pretty quickly.
Very nice. Very nice. Super.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, really that whole as a service phenomenon is creeped into everything, including commerce, and you don't have to build it. Neiman Marcus built their own, but in 1998, when they launched their website, you had to build your own. There wasn't a consulting group of consulting experts necessary to bring in to do it. So one of the things you mentioned early in that exchange, Jason, was how Twitter have been responsible for your last 4 jobs, and that kind of social that being present on Twitter. I was just curious what you think about the whole Clubhouse phenomenon. Especially now that you've got a lot of these other big platforms, replicating, copying, whatever you want to call it, that kind of capability.
Yeah. I guess like a general and a specific answer. Like generally, I think it's super interesting and smart to always be toe dipping into the the latest platforms, and it's really foolish to sit in our chair and predict what's going to be the winner and the loser, because again, like there were a bunch of people that made money on MySpace that didn't think Facebook was very viable, right? And in my exact share, I have a unique phenomenon that really helps me. There are 3 Jason Goldbergs that are famous in e-commerce. So there's one of the biggest cash rages ever for an e-commerce business was this company called Fab.com that was founded by a much better looking Jason Goldberg than I am. Also, I think younger. And then, one of the senior leaders at Gilt that went on to run e-commerce at Target, and today is the CEO he just moved, I think, he just left Blue Nile to go, I'm embarrassed that I can't remember, but Jason Goldberger. When Jason Goldberger became the vice president of e-commerce at Target, I immediately got 5,000 LinkedIn invites from Target employees, right? Because so we joke it's the best name in e-commerce because the 3 of us do know each other a little bit. So there's a land grab. Every time there's a new service, you want to be the first one there to get the Jason Goldberg, moniker. And so that's given me a little incentive to be an early mover into some of these new platforms. And I think you can learn a lot. You can't predict what's going to win or lose, but there's something to learn from each of them. So in general, I was an early adopter on Clubhouse. I'm getting all these invites now because I have a couple phone numbers, and I'm telling them like, dude, I was on Clubhouse last March when it was cool. So I do try to get on those early platforms. I would recommend that to anyone to sort of experiment. And awesome. Often it's easier to carve out some awareness on a new platform to be a big fish in a small pond than to try to trying to jump into YouTube this year and be noticed is difficult.
I guess that the train's pulled out of the station with TikTok and a lot of these other platforms as well, right?
Yeah. That being said, I'm not the hugest fan of Clubhouse specifically. So this clip probably won't age well, but I'm not predicting that Clubhouse is going to be a huge hit, and therefore it means it probably will be astronomical, and I'm wrong.
Yeah. No, and I get it. Yeah, it's just interesting to get your take, because I struggle as well with is this a flash in the pan, or is this, does this have staying power, right? And grows into the next big thing. I didn't necessarily think, that the Twitter concept was a very good idea when I was first introduced to it, to be quite frank. Going out and, saying, your thoughts and, whatever the character limit was back then, little snippets, seemed like, what, really? How can this be a viable thing? And, look how wrong I was about that.
But are you guys on TikTok?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And how does that work for you? Well,
Scott?
Well, for me, look, I am not producing content on TikTok. I'm not. But it is a tremendous time waster for me in terms of viewing content, I do have to say.
Yeah. TikTok's a painful reminder for me. Again, like for work, I try to experience all these platforms. And the fun thing, Carlos will appreciate this, it's way harder to experience the platforms that aren't in your indigenous markets, right? So super important platforms to me are like WeChat and Taobao Live. And I used to have to mail money, cash, currency to a coworker in China to open a bank account on my behalf because you required a Chinese bank account, which American citizens couldn't technically have. Today, it's a little easier to do those platforms. So I do sit on all those platforms. Each platform's unique, and to produce the best content for each platform, it should be bespoke. And I don't have the bandwidth to invest in content creation for all of them. So I wouldn't consider myself a TikTok content creator. But I would say there's a learning there that people have short attention spans, and short form content wins over long form content. And it's an ongoing joke. I recently started producing some YouTube content, and it's way too long.
But it's great. I mean, we're going to talk about your YouTube content as well. But I think you got to have both on YouTube, because you need to have the small bits, just like on LinkedIn. But the long format content as well. I think they both work anyhow.
Yeah, I thought the YouTube content I viewed, getting ready for our talk today was pretty good. By the way, I don't know. I didn't feel like it was too long, but then again, you're talking about things I do for a living, so maybe I have a more keen interest than a more casual viewer.
You may have been in my 8-person target audience.
Maybe so. So maybe we'll shift the discussion to your target audience, which more around e-commerce and retail, if you'd like. And so one of the articles you've written, you compared the impact of COVID to the Chicxulub impactor, which, for those who don't know what that is, the asteroid that destroyed the dinosaurs about 65 million years ago. So I thought it was a great analogy, right? Especially when you think about the destruction and devastation, that the initial impact caused, but the opportunities and the kind of the new things that kind of came out and thrived as a result. I was like, yeah, that's a really good comparison. So when you think of it, so you go back to April 2020, and the world's going to end in terms of retail, right? At that point, and then you go to May, and it's like this 100%, if not more than 100% rebound the other way. But I think that it's interesting your take on how those numbers. That you gotta dive deeper into those numbers to understand what they mean, because it's not necessarily evenly distributed, if you will, about who the winners and losers were. I'd love your to comment there.
Yeah. Well, I agree. You have to be really careful about averages and aggregates. There's a much smarter content creator than me, Avanesh, who's a digital evangelist for Google, and he produces a lot of content talking about the problems with averages and the need to sort of segment. But my joke is, on average, Nepal is flat, right? Like, there's just as much elevation as there is de-elevation, but there is, in fact, a giant mountain in the middle. In the same way, retail had a great year last year. United States retail was up 3.4%. We sold $5.6 trillion worth of stuff. That was exactly in the middle of everyone's estimates for the year. So if you look at it on average, COVID didn't happen. Retail had a very typical year. But of course, nobody grew by 3.4%. There were, pronounced winners and losers, right? And if you were a grocery store and you got gifted all that spending that used to go to restaurants, you had a great year. If you were a do-it-yourself store and you got gifted all the home improvement dollars that used to go to vacations and travel, you had a great year. If you were a sporting goods store and you got gifted all that revenue that used to go to gyms, you had a great year. If you were a gas station, pretty cruddy year, right? So my sympathies to all the odometer people on odometer day, because the odometers did not get a good workout this year.
Terrible year for odometers, yeah.
Exactly. And so the magic question is, like, what's the impact of those disruptions, right? Does that great year in grocery create a springboard that's an opportunity for grocery to permanently evolve and change, and it's never going to look like it did before COVID? Or is it a blip, and 3 years from now we look back and it's pretty similar to how it was before COVID, right? And so that's frankly, that what sticks versus what reverts conversation is a very common conversation amongst my clients across a wide variety of behaviors that changed during the pandemic.
Yeah, so I made my exit in 2018 from luxury retail into department store retail. And, looking back over the last year, that was a really good decision to go, do something else. because they were definitely one of the ones on the losing end of the pandemic. And when all this got started, you had this push. It's pretty typical. I saw it in 2008. I lived through it in 2008. To clamp down on the spending, to go into these severe, kind of austerity mode. What we called it, I was in IT, infrastructure team, and we called it burning the furniture to keep the lights on, is what we called it. But it was an austerity program, and a lot of retailers did this, as COVID hit. So what do you think? Who did it right? Who did it wrong? Who cut off their nose to spite their face? So this maybe a way to put it. And maybe cut in the wrong places. Especially that you think about, we're vaccinated. I'm vaccinated. The world's starting to feel a little better, at least here in the U.S., right? And things seem to be loosening up and more upbeat, right? And where do we go from here as well?
Yeah. So tricky, right? If you think about it, 3 likely outcomes for any business in a disruption: fail, survive, or thrive, right? And there's we don't have perfect data on pandemics. There haven't been that many pandemics in history, thank goodness. And the ones that are most similar to this were so long ago that that it's hard to draw direct analogies, right? Like the Spanish flu, the world was very different for. SARS is the closest in China, but it was only regional. But in general, recessions and depressions, we have a lot of great data on. And it turns out that if you don't want to go bankrupt during a recession, the number one thing you can do to avoid bankruptcy is be liquid and have as much cash on hand. So all of those austerity measures that suck to live through and are, brutal to be part of, they demonstrably help keep you from going bankrupt during a recession. And so while they do suck, there's some merit to them. And so if you're interested in landing in the survive instead of fail, austerity is the play to go. However, companies also thrive in these disruptions. And almost every famous company that you and I know and admire, if you go back to their origin story, they were probably born during some kind of disruption, right? We tend to get a lot more interesting, viable companies that are born in recessions than we do in, bull markets. And if you look at the track record of companies that grew in a recession, the biggest thing they did is invested, right? So that sounds paradoxical. I've got to save money to avoid going bankrupt, and I have to spend that money to position myself for an outsized return in the future, right? And in some ways they are paradoxical, but so the trick is save as much money as possible and then intelligently deploy that capital on the few things that are going to give you the best return, right? So, I mean, the joke is like, when do you want to buy a beach house in the Hamptons? Like in a recession, because there's more houses available and they're a lot cheaper, right? And so in this disruption is the time to get outsized return by investing in your future. So like what retailers invested in the future? Like, I mean, it sounds trite for us to say it, and I know we're in the industry, but it's the omni-channel playbook, right? Like the winner in the pandemic, and I'm only going to give them a A- because I feel like some of it was luck that they invested before the pandemic, was Target, right? Like they bought, shipped. They were best positioned to have a fulfillment from store e-commerce model and curbside pickup and last mile delivery. And all those things killed for them. They delivered 95, they grew, they're, a top 10 e-commerce site. They grew 150% during the pandemic. 95% of all their orders were fulfilled from store. Hard to do better than that. Companies like Walmart, Walmart ran a Super Bowl ad for curbside pickup 2 months before the pandemic, right? Like that was already a big strategic bet for Walmart, and they're wildly investing in it. Best Buy, like Best Buy, I worked for Best Buy for a long time. Like, we had a meeting every month called the curbside pickup meeting. We probably had it for 8 years and we never did curbside pickup. They rolled out curbside pickup to like 500 stores in a weekend, right? Like, which is amazing agility. And they're shrinking. They're testing a store that's half the size of a traditional store because it has a fulfillment center in the back, right? Like, they foresee a future in which stores are still super important, but the role of the store is different and the way the inventory is deployed is different. So I look at some of those omni-channel retailers that made investments in doubling down on omni-channel as likely winners. I'll name 2 great retailers that I think are fabulous retailers that I think utterly blew it in the pandemic. Time will tell. Costco and Trader Joe's. Costco is one of the most successful retailers in history. Trader Joe's is an outsized performer in grocery. They both don't like digital very much, right? Like, they both, like Costco famously, sees no reason to spend any money on dissuading people from going to the store. Trader Joe's feels like providing the best customer service and having a great human interaction is more valuable than a website. I think all of those customer service elements that Costco and Trader Joe's lean into are really valuable and important, but not instead of digital. I think it's in addition to digital. And so I would argue their underinvestment in digital, I don't think is going to be a long-term benefit to them. This is almost not fair to pick on, but like, you probably didn't want to be Burlington Coke Factory that decided e-commerce wasn't a thing and turned it off in February, right before the pandemic.
Yeah. And hold on, I popped into my notes and then got into the wrong place here.
You were watching a TikTok video. I know it.
No, I wasn't. I was trying to jump ahead because there were some things you spoke to in your answer that I had further down my notes that I wanted to address. And I was reading a very recent, like from May 11th, the Harvard Business Review article on e-commerce and the post-pandemic future was the name of the article. And one of the things they stated is, it's when we think about what's going to stick, right? That here we are on the other end of the pandemic, and what's going to stick. One of their claims I found interesting is it all comes down to how good you are on delivery side of things, and those are the guys that are going to keep their customers. The folks that that figured out how to get it to you on time and continue to, and consumers aren't going to take COVID as an excuse to not get it fast any longer. Love to get your position there, and I think related to that is, and it was also mentioned in the article, is the store as a fulfillment center. You'd sort of alluded to that with the Best Buy example in your previous answer.
Yeah. Well, so I do think delivery experience and speed of delivery are super important and increasingly important dimensions of customer experience. A common mistake I see is people too narrowly defining customer experience, right? So to a lot of shopper marketers, customer experience equals shopping experience, right up until they get your credit card, and that's the end of it, right? And these things like fulfillment and post-service ownership experiences are super important parts of customer experience. If I'm not a big fan of surveying consumers to ask their opinions, because I think 97% of all these decisions are subconscious. And so, you ask someone's rational mind, they can't explain it. But if we look at the things that consumers put in the bucket of customer satisfaction 10 years ago versus the things they put in the bucket of customer satisfaction today, I'll bet speed of delivery is way more important today than it was 10 years ago. And we probably have those bastards at Amazon to thank for that, right? Like they certainly raised the bars for everyone. But I had a funny debate in one of my LinkedIn groups. There's a bunch of retail in-store customer experience experts that are talking about how, this speed of delivery is like a fad. And in the long run, being Neiman Marcus and taking great care of your customers is going to be more important than speed of delivery. I'm never going to argue against taking care of customers and having a good customer experience. Here's the reality. Do you know who the highest net promoter score retailer was in 2010? It was Nordstrom. Do you know who the highest net promoter score is today? It's Amazon, right? Like customers have Nordstrom remembers your birthday and greet you when you come in the store and they have a guy playing the piano. Amazon won't let you talk to a human being, right? The reality is like that customers have redefined customer service and customer satisfaction to be when I click this button, the product shows up 5 hours later, right? And so that's the current definition of customer experience. And so it's super important to meet that. When one industry or one segment of the industry improves that experience, the expectation changes for everything, right? So when you can get your books in 2 days from Amazon, you suddenly don't understand why it takes 2 weeks to get a shirt from Abercrombie and Fitch, right? And so last year, Amazon went from 2 day to 1 day, and that changed the expectation for everyone. And then I guess the last part of your question, why the stores are so important. The stores are so important because Amazon has an insurmountable advantage for home delivery. Warren Buffett famously said, Jeff Bezos probably isn't the guy you want to give a 7-year head start to. Amazon has 192 fulfillment centers in the United States of America. The second biggest e-commerce site in the U.S. is Walmart with 30. Almost everyone else has 1 or 2. So if you want to catch Amazon for fulfillment capability, you better bring 3 commas because you're going to have to spend over $100 billion to do it, right? Don't know if we just lost Carlos there, but we'll talk about him while he's gone.
Yeah, absolutely. He's back.
He's back. Darn it, we got to stop talking about him. So unlikely someone's going to catch up to Amazon for home fulfillment centers. And by the way, Amazon added like 90 last year. They added more capacity last year than Walmart has in the world. So they're way ahead in home delivery. So if your plan is to open fulfillment centers in competition with Amazon, I would argue that's not a viable strategy. But if Amazon is driving those packages 100 miles out of a 1 million square foot fulfillment center, and Target is driving those packages 5 miles out of a 100,000 square foot store, Target can get that package to you cheaper and faster than Amazon can, even though Amazon has an insurmountable advantage in fulfillment centers. And so to me, like if there's a 800-pound gorilla, the strategy is not to become a 1,000-pound gorilla and wrestle them. The strategy is to become an elephant or something else, right? And so like that solving that last model by staging the inventory closer to the customer makes a lot of sense, and that's an awful lot of what retail stores are good at.
Yeah, to go back to the experience.
Real quick, and then you just bookmark say in English question, but it's because different models of right. So you have Amazon in the US looking a lot at the logistics, and in Brazil, have you heard of? I think you did Mercado Libre.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And they're appealing. Yes, it's logistics doing what the couriers are not been able to do. So they're public system should be doing, but they also have which it's not that you isn't doing, and so the bank growth. So I wanted to see your you're talking at ecosystems in some and how ecosystems are important in these growth strategies.
Yeah.
So Scott.
Every geography is definitely different, and I apologize. The what's going to work in a market with one set of infrastructure challenges and opportunities is definitely not going to work in another. Asia and Latin America both have a different circumstance that creates different strengths and weaknesses, right? Like they don't have as strong of a national distribution center as we have in the U.S. So we have carriers like FedEx and UPS that promise to go to every address in those cities. In our countries. In China, there's not one delivery firm that does that. Or in India, there's not one delivery firm that does that. And in Brazil, there isn't one delivery firm. And so you tend to have a network of delivery firms that do that, right? And so when someone opens an e-commerce site, you either have to federate a bunch of these delivery firms or you have to figure out your own delivery. So that's what Alibaba has essentially done. They're not relying on the Chinese equivalent of FedEx. Like, they're building the Chinese equivalent of FedEx, and they're renting warehouse space from tons of brick and mortar retailers across the country to do that in a different way. So I think the circumstances change, and also I would just say, like, cost of labor in Brazil and China is a lot lower than the U.S., and so that actually makes the last mile a lot more appealing. If I'm a major retailer in Brazil, if I'm Magazine Luiza, I can pay someone to drive the furniture to the customer's home and build the furniture in the customer's home and give them a very different experience than an American consumer expects, where that IKEA table is going to get dropped off in the front porch. So I do think you have to consider some of those regional differences when you're thinking about the opportunities.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna change the topic a little bit, and one of the things you talk a lot about, Jason, is what the state of kind of e-commerce sales and growth are, and you do a lot of content about specifically about Amazon's results and Google's results and so forth. All very interesting, by the way. We appreciate you providing us those insights. What people like to talk about how much e-commerce grew and what it is in terms of how big the sales were and compared to physical store sales. And I know you have very specific opinions about how that data can easily be misinterpreted. And I'm especially interested in your take on digitally influenced sales versus the actual, I put it in the cart and bought it bit.
Yeah. Well, so there's lots of room for ambiguity and variance in how we measure and how we report, right? And people are super fixated on these. What percentage of retail sales is e-commerce? And I generally hate that metric. I don't think it makes a lot of sense to pay attention to that metric. And just one example, Amazon had their earnings report 2 weeks ago, and it was amazing. Everything was phenomenal. There was one negative thing that was kind of buried in their report. Our brick and mortar sales were down 17%. Now,
that's no shock, right? It'd be a surprise even.
Well, the reason it would be a surprise to some people is because Amazon's brick and mortar sales are almost exclusively grocery stores. And the one category of brick and mortar that all grew during the pandemic was grocery stores, right? Because there's $20 billion a month worth of spending that used to go to restaurants that now goes to Kroger. So you go, wait a minute, how did Whole Foods lose 17% of their sales during the pandemic? That's impossible. And the reason it's impossible is because in Amazon's ecosystem, when you order home delivery from WholeFoods.com, that's an Amazon sale, not a Whole Foods sale. Okay. So their stupid accounting is different.
It's an attribution problem.
Yeah, it's a silly attribution problem. So I don't care very much about that attribution. It's a little bit like in Best Buy saying, you know what? Sales from cash registers that are operated by left-handed people are 70% higher than cash registers operated by right-handed people, right? Like that probably true. Could be true. Correlation does not equal causation. I don't care, right? And so where you decide to get your food delivered, don't care. What I care about is how much food you needed and who you chose to get it from. And so to me, the better metric that you alluded to is to look at overall sales and then say, if you're in the digital ecosystem, say what percentage of that overall sales were digitally influenced. So I don't care where you paid or where you placed the order. I care about, like, did you use Google Maps to find a store near you that had it in stock? Did you use my store locator to see what my hours were? Did you read the reviews of my store on Yelp? Did you read the reviews of the product on Amazon? Like, these are all digital experiences that I have to get right in order to win. And so the thing I'm interested in is what percentage of that overall sales are digitally influenced. A bunch of brands and retailers are adopting some flavor of that metric. And Forrester says, like, pre-pandemic, it was 49% of all retail sales were digitally influenced. By my math, as a result of the pandemic, it's about 61% of digitally influenced sales. So I spend a lot of time talking to digital marketers, and I always open with the fact that they're wildly underpaid, and we need to get them a raise because they're the front door of all these shopping experiences. NeimanMarcus.com is way more important than that Dallas flagship.
Yeah, which, it's funny you should mention that. My last year at Neiman Marcus, what I was focused on was the technology for the Hudson Yards Gateway store. As was much of the company. That was a huge effort. With millions upon millions of dollars being spent to get that store right, and we were pretty happy with the results. When it opened, and less than 2 years later, it's no longer even there, right? It's been, it's closed, and it's a Facebook office now or something completely ridiculous. So I think one of the things you say is, or have said, is that, mobile's your new front door. Mobile and digital are your new front door, and completely agree with that. And, it goes back to something else I read when, reading through your stuff, and that was that e-commerce solves buying, but it breaks shopping. I think that treating your e-commerce site like a glorified digital catalog, and not trying to replicate, all the things that, many retailers learned and were good at, with their physical spaces, is a missed opportunity. Especially think about, grocery stores, for instance, right? This curbside pickup, right? And so if I'm doing curbside pickup, then I'm not doing all that impulse buying, right? During my journey.
Yeah, huge
store.
problem.
So why are they not replicating those opportunities as I shop, the site for my curbside, right? There's an innovation opportunity there, I would think. It's not that you can't do it, you just have to do it different. Who's doing it 100%? Different? Who's doing it different?
Yeah, it's tricky. I do feel like it's a hard instinct to get over, right? Like, anytime there's something new, our first instinct is to do a new version of the old thing, right? And so you imagine you were a newspaper advertiser forever and you bought your first TV ad. Your first instinct is going to be to aim the TV camera at your newspaper ad, right? Which is not going to work very well, right? Because it's a different medium. When we were building e-commerce sites at Blockbuster in 1994, there was no model. There was nobody that said, this is what UX should look like. And so do you know what all the prototypes were? They were pictures of the store, and you click the shelf in the store that you wanted to go to, right? Like, think about that. There's 10 different ways to search for movies. Physically in the store, we can only put the movie on one shelf, right? So we can't both assort it by actor and by genre. But digitally, of course we can, right? So why are we constraining ourselves to this physical limitation in this digital thing? Because that's the first version. When Sir Ives and team at Apple invented the first Apple user interface, they made it look physical, right? Like they simulated paper on the screen and paper clips and things to make it feel like a digital version of the analog thing. Over time, like, we learn how to do it better. And so in the same way, when we first have to do curbside pickup, we most get locked into the paradigm of the store. And per your point, like, you're still going to pick the products in the store, right? Because that's how we did it in a physical store. In the digital world, we may buy the products at Walmart.com, but we may discover the products not in the soap aisle, but on TikTok, right? And so that discovery experience that we're miscreating on Walmart.com maybe needs to live on a influencer's TikTok account. So we shall see.
Well, Jason, I could easily fill another hour up with you because just talking about this kind of social as a commerce platform would be an awesome discussion. We'd love to have you back sometime down the road. I've got 6 more pages of notes that we're nowhere near, but I see we've spent about an hour with you, and so we probably ought to wrap this up at this point. So I want to thank you personally. And it looks like Carlos is in a live video again. So congratulations, Carlos, for your head moving for the first time in 15 minutes.
Seriously. Okay.
Your video was weird.
I think it was camera resolution, but anyhow, that's not important. Thank you very much. It's been, like a masterclass. You two guys talk. I always say that he's. I'm more like Rob. Just and there, but I want to thank you very much for this, and we could do like a follow-up down the road. It would be great. Thanks for this.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, it was amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jason.
Great to catch up with both of you. I really enjoyed the conversation, and be well, everyone.